Three armed men crashed through the warehouse doors just as the city's most feared mafia boss pulled the trigger without hesitation. The gunfight erupted so violently that even veteran soldiers dove for cover. Amid the chaos, one terrified curvy woman swung her oversized tote bag straight into a masked attacker's face before screaming, "Wrong person! You grabbed the wrong woman!" Silence followed for exactly 1 second. Then every soldier turned toward their boss. For the first time in years, Damien Cross realized his flawless operation had gone catastrophically wrong. The frightened woman standing in front of him wasn't a courier. She was an ordinary hospital cafeteria supervisor who had absolutely no idea why two crime families were suddenly fighting over her. The explosion of automatic gunfire rolled across the abandoned shipping warehouse like thunder trapped inside concrete walls. Bullets shredded wooden crates. Dust drifted through broken skylights. Spent shell casings bounced across the floor with metallic echoes. Damien Cross never flinched. His steel-gray suit remained immaculate despite the chaos surrounding him. Every movement was calm, every command precise. North entrance. Two soldiers immediately shifted positions. Roof. A hidden sniper disappeared before he could squeeze the trigger again. Secure the package. Three armed guards instinctively formed a protective circle around the frightened woman standing near the loading dock. Nora Callahan had never been more confused in her life. Only 30 minutes earlier, she had been finishing inventory at St. Agnes Hospital's kitchen. She had spent nearly an hour arguing with a supplier over frozen vegetable trays. Her biggest concern had been whether the dietary cart would make its rounds before the night shift ended. Now, strangers carrying assault rifles were risking their lives to protect her or kidnap her. Honestly, she wasn't entirely sure which. Her wrists were secured with plastic zip ties. Someone had pushed her into an armored SUV. Another man had politely apologized while doing it. The apology somehow made everything even stranger. She looked around wildly. "I think you've made a mistake." Nobody answered. "I don't even know any criminals." Still nothing. One soldier briefly glanced toward her before returning fire. Another muttered, "Please keep your head down, ma'am." "Ma'am." She was being kidnapped politely. A masked attacker suddenly burst from behind a stack of shipping containers and rushed directly toward her. Nora's heart nearly stopped. She reacted without thinking. Her oversized canvas tote swung through the air with surprising force. The heavy bag slammed directly into the attacker's face. His mask twisted sideways. He stumbled backward into another gunman. Both men crashed through a pile of wooden pallets. The entire warehouse froze. Nora blinked. "Did I just hit him?" One of Cross's soldiers stared at her. "So did I," he whispered. Another soldier coughed, desperately trying not to laugh. The moment lasted less than a heartbeat. More gunfire erupted. Damien stepped forward without hesitation. Two perfectly controlled shots. Two attackers collapsed. The remaining gunmen retreated toward the rear loading docks before disappearing into the darkness. Silence slowly settled over the warehouse. Only damaged electrical wires continued crackling overhead. Several wounded men groaned nearby. Smoke drifted lazily through shattered windows. One of Damien's senior lieutenants approached carrying a black aluminum briefcase. "We recovered it." Damien accepted the case without looking away from Nora. "Verify the contents." The lieutenant unlocked it. Everyone leaned closer. Instead of encrypted hard drives, instead of financial ledgers, instead of classified documents, inside sat neatly folded paperwork, a staffing roster, dietary order forms, patient allergy sheets, color-coded meal charts. Someone quietly cleared his throat. Another soldier slowly closed his eyes. The warehouse became strangely silent. Nora cautiously raised one hand. "Those are mine." Nobody moved. "Our meal schedules." Still nothing. I spent 3 hours organizing them. One guard looked toward another. Another looked toward Damien. Finally, the oldest advisor spoke. "Boss." His voice sounded unusually careful. "I don't believe rival organizations prepare hospital menus." No one laughed because no one dared. Damien slowly opened one folder. Across the top of the page were handwritten words. "Low sodium rotation, Thursday." Below that, notes on portion adjustments for the cardiac ward. He turned another page. Shift contact numbers, allergy lists, volunteer schedules, nothing remotely connected to organized crime. Nora swallowed. So, she forced an awkward smile. I'm guessing I'm probably not the international courier you're looking for. For perhaps the first time in nearly 15 years, nobody inside the Cross organization knew what to say. Damien closed the folder. His expression remained unreadable, but every experienced lieutenant recognized the warning signs. Their boss had just realized something impossible. His intelligence network, his surveillance team, his entire operation had taken the wrong woman. And somewhere across the city, the person they were actually hunting still possessed the information capable of destroying both empires. Worse still, if Salvatore Reyes learned what had happened, this harmless hospital worker would become valuable simply because everyone believed she knew something. Whether she actually did would no longer matter. No one spoke for nearly 20 seconds. Inside the warehouse, silence felt far more dangerous than the gunfire had. Every man present understood exactly what had happened. The Cross family had planned the operation for nearly 3 weeks. Their surveillance team had tracked a female courier believed to be carrying encrypted financial records capable of exposing Salvatore Reyes's offshore accounts, bribed officials, and hidden weapon routes. The woman had been observed leaving the same medical complex every Thursday evening. She always carried a large canvas bag. She drove the same silver sedan. She followed the exact same route. Everything had matched. Everything except the woman. One intelligence officer slowly removed his earpiece. His face had turned pale. "Boss," he hesitated. "Our surveillance photos," he swallowed, "were taken from across the parking structure." Damien looked at him. The man immediately wished he hadn't spoken. Another advisor hurried over carrying a tablet. "We're checking traffic cameras." His fingers flew across the screen. The warehouse remained eerily quiet. Finally, he stopped. His expression collapsed. "We have visual confirmation. The actual courier left the building 4 minutes after Miss Callahan." Another silence. Their coats were nearly identical. Nora blinked. "My raincoat caused all of this." The advisor nodded weakly. "You both carried oversized bags." She looked down at her navy raincoat. "I bought this because it was waterproof." No one knew how to respond. One younger soldier whispered under his breath, "We almost started a gang war over a clearance rack." The older lieutenant beside him elbowed him sharply. "Not now. Definitely not now." For a brief moment, Nora forgot she had been kidnapped. She looked around the warehouse, then quietly asked, "So? Does this mean I can go home?" Every experienced soldier avoided looking at her. Damien finally answered, "No." The single word landed like a stone. Nora's hopeful smile disappeared. "I understand you're frightened." His voice remained calm. "But releasing you now would likely get you killed." She frowned. "I work in a hospital kitchen. I've never even had a parking ticket. What possible reason would anyone have to hurt me?" The oldest lieutenant sighed. "Because they think you know something." "I don't. They won't believe that." Nora opened her mouth, closed it again, opened it once more. "I literally know how to portion low-sodium meals." "They'll assume you're lying." "I know how to file a dietary complaint." "They'll think it's code." "I alphabetize supply orders." "They'll probably assume that's code too." Several soldiers looked down to hide reluctant smiles. Even in the middle of disaster, this woman somehow kept making people want to laugh. Damien noticed. He wasn't amused. He was analyzing. Most civilians reacted to danger with panic. Some froze. Others screamed. Nora did something entirely different. She talked constantly. Not because she enjoyed hearing herself speak, but because speaking seemed to steady her heartbeat. "Interesting." The observation lodged quietly in his mind. One of the security officers interrupted. "We intercepted radio traffic. Everyone focused on him. Rise's people believe we successfully extracted the courier." Another pause. They're mobilizing. Estimated response, less than an hour. The warehouse suddenly felt much smaller. One advisor spoke carefully. "If they believe she has the records." He glanced toward Nora. "They'll never stop hunting her." Another lieutenant nodded. "They'll watch her apartment, her workplace. Anyone she speaks to, they'll assume she's hiding evidence." Nora slowly raised one tied hand. "Question." The room turned toward her. "If I explain I'm just responsible for hospital meal trays—" No one answered. She sighed. "I was afraid you'd say that." 40 minutes later, a convoy of armored SUVs left the warehouse under heavy escort. Nora sat in the middle vehicle. 2 soldiers occupied the seats beside her. Neither looked older than 30. Both carried rifles almost as long as their legs. The silence became unbearable. "So?" Neither man responded. "My name's Nora." Still silence. "I make excellent lasagna." Nothing. "I also bake banana bread." The soldier nearest the window finally glanced toward her. "My grandmother used to bake banana bread." His partner immediately frowned. "Don't encourage conversation." "I'm just saying." "No." Nora smiled gently. "I promise I'm not trying to escape. I actually get carsick." Both soldiers looked confused. "What?" "In armored vehicles, almost." On cue, the SUV hit a pothole. Nora immediately covered her mouth. "Oh no." The driver looked into the rearview mirror. "Seriously?" She nodded miserably. "I warned you." The convoy came to an abrupt stop several minutes later. One deeply frustrated bodyguard climbed out carrying bottled water and motion sickness tablets. Another muttered, "I've protected judges. I've protected foreign clients. I've never had to stop a tactical convoy because the hostage was nauseous." Nora accepted the water with embarrassed gratitude. "I'm really sorry." The guard scratched the back of his neck. "It's okay." Then, almost involuntarily, he added, "My son gets carsick too." Nora smiled. "What grade?" He blinked. "3rd. Tell him ginger chews sometimes help." The guard nodded before realizing he had just accepted parenting advice from the woman they had kidnapped. Nearly an hour later, enormous iron gates opened. Beyond them stood the Cross estate. Nora expected something resembling an ancient fortress. Instead, she found a breathtaking blend of old stone architecture and modern security. Elegant buildings surrounded carefully maintained gardens. Security cameras tracked every movement. Armed guards patrolled discreetly. Luxury and danger existed side by side. As she stepped from the SUV, dozens of employees paused to stare. Housekeepers, gardeners, kitchen staff, private security. No one spoke aloud, but whispers spread almost immediately. "Who's she? New witness? Government negotiator?" "No. I heard she's the woman the boss risked everything to capture." Nora leaned toward the nearest guard. "I wish someone would explain that to me." He almost smiled. Almost. Inside the mansion, Damien walked straight toward his private office. His chief advisor caught up with him. "We've confirmed Miss Callahan has absolutely no criminal record." "I assumed as much. Hospital employee. Volunteers every Sunday." Silence. "Organizes a food pantry drive." Another silence. "She once received an award for patient care." Damien finally stopped walking. "What about family?" "Parents deceased. No siblings. Few close relatives." "Financial situation?" "Stable. Modest. No unusual activity." The advisor hesitated before adding, "Boss, she's exactly who she says she is." Damien looked through the office window toward the front courtyard. Nora stood awkwardly between 2 heavily armed guards. She looked impossibly out of place, a cheerful woman wearing worn sneakers, standing inside one of the most heavily protected estates on the East Coast. He had built an empire by eliminating uncertainty. He trusted preparation, precision, information. Yet one mistake, one ordinary woman, threatened to unravel everything. Down in the courtyard, Nora looked up at the massive mansion, then quietly asked the nearest guard, "This may sound like a strange question." He waited. "But has anyone here eaten dinner yet?" The guard frowned. "What if everyone skipped lunch because of the shooting?" She looked around at the exhausted faces surrounding her. You're all probably starving." The guard simply stared. He had expected fear, anger, crying. Instead, the kidnapped woman seemed worried that her kidnappers hadn't eaten. He had absolutely no idea what to do with that information. The following morning, Nora woke expecting to find bars on the windows. Instead, soft sunlight filtered through linen curtains. The bedroom was larger than her entire apartment. Fresh flowers sat on a polished wooden table. A tray holding coffee, fruit, and warm pastries rested nearby. For a long moment, she wondered if the previous night had been a stress-induced dream. Then she noticed the armed guard standing outside the open bedroom door. Right. Definitely not a dream. She slowly walked into the hallway. The guard straightened immediately. "Good morning, Miss Callahan." She gave him a confused smile. "Am I a prisoner?" He hesitated. "Technically, but you're getting breakfast in bed. We were instructed to make sure you're comfortable." Nora blinked. This is the nicest kidnapping in recorded history. The guard almost laughed. Almost. Meanwhile, the mansion was already awake. Security teams rotated shifts. Drivers prepared armored vehicles. Lawyers arrived carrying briefcases. Lieutenants argued over shipping manifests and intelligence reports. Despite the wealth surrounding them, exhaustion hung over everyone. The kitchen was no exception. 3 cooks were shouting over one another. A dishwasher had broken overnight. Breakfast orders were delayed. Half the security detail had skipped dinner after the warehouse battle. Several guards simply grabbed protein bars from a vending machine before returning to patrol. Nora quietly watched the chaos from the doorway. She recognized the look instantly. She had seen it every holiday season in the hospital kitchen. Too many tasks, no clear system, everyone working hard but not together. One cook slammed a pan onto the counter. "We're out of eggs again. We ordered more. They're still on the delivery truck." No one updated the inventory. Nora couldn't stop herself. "Excuse me." Everyone turned. "If you're making scrambled eggs for that many people," she pointed toward several unopened boxes, "those cartons contain liquid eggs." The head cook frowned. "We save those for—" He opened his mouth, then closed it. "I actually don't know." Nora smiled apologetically. "May I?" The cook looked toward the security cameras. Several guards shrugged. He stepped aside. Within minutes, Nora had organized the counters, separated ingredients by station, assigned one person to toast, another to hot food, another to drinks. She never raised her voice, never criticized anyone. She simply kept asking gentle questions. "Who enjoys making omelets?" "You, great, stay there." "Who's fastest at prepping fruit?" "You, perfect. Can someone label these trays before they leave the kitchen?" The shouting slowly disappeared. 20 minutes later, breakfast was flowing smoothly. The head cook stared in disbelief. "I've worked here 11 years. She smiled. "I've worked a hospital cafeteria during flu season. I promise it's harder." Several kitchen employees burst into laughter. Across the mansion, guards began noticing something unusual. Their breakfasts arrived warm. Coffee was actually hot. Nobody had forgotten the night shift officers. Someone had even included handwritten labels: night shift, gate security, medical team. One veteran guard opened his container. There was an extra banana muffin inside. Attached was a small handwritten note. "Long night, eat both." He stared at it. Who did this? The hostage. He looked up. The hostage. Late that morning, Damien entered the operations room. The atmosphere felt different. Normally, conversations stopped the moment he entered. Today, they did, but something else caught his attention. People looked awake. One guard actually looked well rested. Impossible. He turned toward his chief advisor. "Report. No incidents. The southern docks are secure. Reyes's movements remain under surveillance." Damien nodded, then frowned. "Why does everyone seem happier?" The advisor hesitated. "We're still investigating." "You need to investigate morale. It appears connected to Miss Callahan." Damien looked up. "Explain." "She reorganized the kitchen." Silence. and people ate breakfast. Another silence. Proper breakfast. Damien stared. The advisor continued carefully. Apparently, she also convinced the cooks to prepare meals according to patrol schedules instead of kitchen convenience. That's all, mostly. And somehow my soldiers are smiling because of eggs. The advisor cleared his throat. Good eggs. Nora spent the afternoon wandering the mansion under escort. Everywhere she looked, she noticed tiny problems. A gardener struggling to move heavy pots alone. A secretary searching through piles of paperwork. Laundry carts blocking emergency exits. Nothing serious individually. Together, constant stress. She asked one maid, "How long have those boxes been there?" 3 months. Why? No one knows whose responsibility they are. Nora nodded thoughtfully. Happens everywhere. At the hospital, she had learned something simple. People rarely ignored problems because they were lazy. Usually, they believed someone else would eventually solve them. By evening, several guards found themselves eating dinner together instead of separately. One frowned. Didn't we always have enough tables? Another looked around. We did. So why didn't we use them? No one had an answer. Nora quietly did. She had simply moved the furniture. That night, Damien reviewed financial reports in his office. A knock interrupted him. Enter. His oldest lieutenant stepped inside. There has been another development. If this concerns breakfast again. It does. Damien slowly lowered his pen. I'm listening. The maintenance crew voluntarily stayed 2 extra hours. Why? They wanted to finish repairs before tomorrow. They've never done that. I know, and they said Miss Callahan thanked them. Silence. She thanked them individually. Damien leaned back. His empire employed hundreds, paid them well, rewarded loyalty, demanded excellence. Yet somehow one civilian had accomplished in a single day what years of discipline never had. People wanted to help because they felt appreciated. It made absolutely no sense. Or perhaps it made perfect sense. He simply had never considered it. Later that evening, Nora found herself standing alone on a balcony overlooking the estate gardens. She wrapped her cardigan tighter against the cool breeze. Footsteps approached behind her. She turned. Damien. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, he asked, "Why are you doing this?" She looked confused. "Doing what?" "Helping. You owe us nothing." She looked out across the gardens. "I know." "Then why?" Nora smiled softly. "When people are tired, they make mistakes. When they're hungry, they argue. When they feel invisible, they stop caring." She glanced back toward the brightly lit mansion. "I can't fix everything, but I know how to make tomorrow a little easier than today." Damien studied her face. No fear, no manipulation, no hidden agenda, only quiet sincerity. It was a language completely foreign to the world he had spent decades building. For the first time in years, the Iron King found himself without an immediate answer. Behind a nearby window, 2 young guards secretly watched the conversation. One whispered, "Is the boss having a normal conversation?" The other shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but I think the hostage is winning." A week passed. No one officially changed Nora's status. She was still technically a protected hostage, but somewhere between breakfast schedules, handwritten thank you notes, and late-night conversations with exhausted staff, the word hostage had quietly disappeared. Now everyone simply called her Miss Callahan. Every morning, Damien followed the exact same routine. He woke before sunrise, reviewed overnight security reports, spent 2 hours studying shipping routes, financial statements, and intelligence updates, ignored breakfast, drank black coffee, started meetings. It had been that way for nearly 20 years. On Monday morning, it changed. As he entered the conference room, he found something unexpected waiting beside his stack of documents. A neatly wrapped sandwich, a bottle of water, a small yellow sticky note. "You skipped breakfast yesterday. Please don't make it a habit." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. One lieutenant cautiously watched the boss's expression. Another quietly prepared for someone to lose their job. Damien picked up the sandwich, looked at it, set it aside. The meeting begins now. Everyone exhaled. The crisis had apparently passed. 30 minutes later, while discussing a container inspection in New Jersey, Damien absent-mindedly opened the wrapper and took a bite. No one dared mention it, but every person in the room noticed. By Wednesday, the sandwich returned. Different ingredients. Another bottle of water. Another note. Coffee isn't breakfast. This time, Damien frowned. Who keeps entering my office? No one answered. Finally, his chief of security admitted, Miss Callahan. And nobody stopped her? You told us she could move freely inside the residence. I did not authorize. He stopped. Technically, he hadn't forbidden it either. The security chief carefully added, She said you'd probably forget to eat again. Silence. Another lieutenant quietly looked out the window to hide a smile. That afternoon, Nora was helping the housekeeping staff reorganize supply closets when two young guards approached. Miss Callahan. She turned. Yes. We have a question. Okay. Our boss. She nodded patiently. Hasn't taken a vacation in 11 years. She blinked. Seriously. The guards nodded together. He sleeps about 4 hours, sometimes less. He refuses birthdays. He ignores holidays. Nora stared. Does he know that's unhealthy? The guards exchanged glances. We were hoping you could tell him. She laughed. You want the kidnapped woman to lecture your Mafia boss about work-life balance? You're the only person he doesn't immediately ignore. That evening, Damien remained inside his office long after midnight. Financial reports covered the desk. Maps filled one wall. Security footage played silently across several monitors. A quiet knock interrupted him. Come in. Nora entered carrying a tray. Not dinner, just tea. Fresh fruit. Another sandwich. He looked at her. I already ate. She raised one eyebrow. When? He paused. Earlier? She looked around. There are 3 untouched coffee cups. Yes. 2 aspirin. Yes. And exactly 0 dirty plates. Silence. She folded her arms. You forgot again. I was busy. So are emergency room doctors. They still eat. He almost replied. Instead, he noticed she wasn't criticizing him. She sounded genuinely concerned. I don't require supervision. No, she smiled. You require lunch. For the first time in years, one corner of Damien's mouth almost moved. Almost. Word spread quickly through the mansion. Miss Callahan had told the boss to eat and survived. The next morning, the story somehow became even bigger. During a strategy meeting, Damien had been staring intensely at satellite photographs while everyone else waited for instructions. Without warning, Nora quietly entered the room. No one breathed. She walked directly toward the head of the table, placed a glass of water beside him, then whispered just loudly enough for everyone to hear. You'd be much scarier if you looked less hungry. Silence. Absolute silence. One advisor accidentally dropped his pen. Another nearly choked, trying not to laugh. A younger soldier turned completely red. Everyone waited for the explosion. Damien slowly looked up. Nora smiled innocently, then walked away. The heavy conference room doors closed behind her. No one moved. Finally, Damien picked up the glass, drank the water, continued the meeting as though nothing unusual had happened. Across the table, 3 lieutenants stared at one another in disbelief. One silently mouthed, Did that actually happen? Another nodded. I think we're all still alive. Over the following days, small miracles continued. The boss began leaving his office for dinner. Not every night, but often enough for people to notice. He occasionally asked kitchen staff where the supplies were running low. He even thanked a mechanic after a difficult repair. The mechanic spent the rest of the week convinced he had imagined it. Nora, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware that she was slowly rewriting the culture of one of the most feared criminal organizations on the East Coast. To her, these weren't revolutionary changes. They were common courtesy. One afternoon, she found two guards arguing over patrol assignments. Instead of choosing sides, she asked, "When was the last time either of you had a day off?" The room became quiet. 3 weeks, 24 days. She frowned. No wonder you're both grumpy. Later that evening, the revised schedule reached Damien's desk. He studied it carefully. Patrol coverage had actually improved. Fatigue had decreased. No security gaps existed. He called his operations chief. "Who prepared this rotation?" "Miss Callahan. She's never managed armed security." "No. Then how?" The chief smiled slightly. "She said, organizing guards isn't very different from organizing a nursing shift." For reasons he couldn't explain, that answer made perfect sense. One rainy evening, Nora found Damien standing alone beneath the covered terrace overlooking the gardens. The rain fell steadily across the stone courtyard. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, she asked, "Do you ever get tired?" He answered honestly, "Yes." "So why don't you rest?" "Because people depend on me." She nodded. "They depend on you tomorrow too." He looked at her. "You think leadership is simple?" "No. I think people confuse being indispensable with being exhausted." The words lingered. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals, survived assassination attempts, outmaneuvered rival families. Yet somehow, a hospital cafeteria supervisor had just challenged an idea he had believed his entire adult life. She stepped beside him. "You know something?" "What?" "When I first started working in that kitchen, I thought the patients needed perfect meals." He listened, but they didn't. They needed someone who cared enough to keep showing up. She smiled. "I think adults are exactly the same." For several long moments, only the sound of rain filled the silence. Behind the dining room windows, a handful of guards secretly watched. One whispered, "I think the boss is smiling." Another narrowed his eyes. No. A third guard leaned closer to the glass. "Wait, he actually is." It wasn't a broad smile, barely more than the faintest softening around his eyes. But for the men who had followed Damien Cross through wars, betrayals, and bloodshed, it was something they had never expected to witness. And none of them realized that this quiet transformation was about to become the greatest weakness Salvatore Reyes had ever hoped to exploit. Nearly 3 weeks after the failed warehouse operation, the Cross estate had settled into an unfamiliar rhythm. The tension had not disappeared. The danger certainly hadn't. But something inside the mansion had changed. Security guards greeted kitchen staff by name. Housekeepers laughed during lunch. Mechanics no longer ate alone beside the garage. Even the oldest lieutenants reluctantly admitted that morale had never been stronger. None of them credited better weapons or larger salaries. The credit belonged to one woman who still insisted she wasn't supposed to be there. Unfortunately, someone else had noticed. Hundreds of miles away, Salvatore Reyes stood inside his private office, staring at surveillance photographs spread across a polished mahogany table. One photograph showed Nora speaking with gardeners. Another captured her delivering coffee to exhausted night shift guards. A third showed Damien standing beside her on the mansion terrace. Salvatore tapped that photograph again. An intelligence officer replayed drone footage. There was no embrace, no obvious affection, only a conversation. Yet Salvatore smiled. "Pause!" The screen froze. Damien had turned slightly toward Nora, not away, toward her. Toward her. Salvatore folded his hands. The Iron King never turns toward anyone. Silence filled the room. One advisor frowned. "Perhaps she's simply a protected witness." Salvatore shook his head. "No. I've studied Damien Cross for 15 years. He protects assets. He doesn't listen to them." Another photograph appeared, Damien accepting a bottle of water from Nora. No expression, no words, but he accepted it. Salvatore chuckled. "There." The room remained confused. "There what?" The weakness. Back at the Cross estate, Nora had absolutely no idea she had become the subject of another family's investigation. She was busy teaching 3 enormous bodyguards how to make homemade minestrone. This isn't tactical. One guard looked horrified. It's vegetables. Exactly. Another soldier carefully chopped onions. I've disarmed explosives. I've never diced carrots. Nora laughed. Today is full of new experiences. Across the kitchen, Damien paused outside the doorway. He watched in silence. 3 elite security officers, men feared throughout the East Coast, were arguing over the correct amount of garlic. One proudly held up a wooden spoon. I think I'm improving. The head chef nearly fainted. The piece ended the following afternoon. An armored convoy returning from the southern docks radioed headquarters. Vehicle disabled. Repeat, disabled. Ambush confirmed. Inside the command center, alarms immediately sounded. Lieutenants rushed toward tactical stations. Large digital maps illuminated the walls. Damien entered without running. He never ran. Report. 12 attackers, professional. They ignored the cargo. What did they take? A long pause. The communications officer removed his headset slowly. They took 4 employees. The room froze. Who? 2 mechanics, 1 bookkeeper, 1 kitchen assistant. Damien's expression darkened. None of those people carried strategic value. Unless... A secure phone rang. The communications officer answered. His face immediately drained of color. He handed the receiver to Damien. It's Reyes. Damien accepted the call. What do you want? Salvatore sounded almost cheerful. I wanted to congratulate you. For what? I've finally discovered your favorite hostage. Silence. I have 4 innocent people. They'll remain perfectly healthy for now. What are your terms? Simple. Trade Nora Callahan. The operations room became deathly quiet. Salvatore continued. Bring her alone. You receive your employees. Refuse. Another pause. And every hour, someone disappears forever. The line went dead. For several seconds, no one moved. Finally, one senior lieutenant spoke. It's a trap. Obviously, we can't surrender Miss Callahan. No. Another advisor added, if Reyes learns she's emotionally important, he'll never stop using her. Damien nodded once. Prepare a rescue operation. No negotiations. Orders immediately flew across the room. Snipers, reconnaissance teams, medical units, escape routes. Within minutes, the mansion transformed into a military headquarters. Everyone focused on one objective, bring their people home. Except one person had overheard nearly everything. Nora stood unnoticed outside the partially open conference room door. She hadn't intended to listen. She had only come to ask whether anyone wanted dinner. Instead, she learned that 4 innocent employees had been kidnapped because of her. She quietly backed away before anyone saw her. Her hands trembled. The mechanic who always waved every morning. The shy bookkeeper who collected paperback mysteries. The kitchen assistant who had taught her an old family soup recipe. They weren't soldiers. They had families, children, parents waiting at home, she whispered to herself. This isn't fair. That evening, the mansion became unusually quiet. Weapons were cleaned, vehicles fueled, body armor distributed. Nora sat alone in the small library. She kept replaying Salvatore's demand. Trade. Save everyone. Simple, except she knew Damien would never agree. Not because he was stubborn, but because he believed protecting people was his responsibility. She understood something he didn't. If she voluntarily surrendered, no one else would need to choose. Shortly after midnight, the rescue convoy departed through the front gates. Dozens of vehicles disappeared into the darkness. No one noticed a small delivery van leaving through the service entrance 15 minutes later. Inside sat Nora. Beside her was only one elderly groundskeeper. He had tried to stop her. She had smiled sadly. I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking for directions. 40 minutes later, the rescue team surrounded an abandoned riverside cannery identified as Reyes's temporary holding site. Damien studied the building through binoculars. Thermal. Multiple heat signatures, hostages alive. Snipers? At least 4. Before anyone could continue, one scout sprinted toward the command vehicle. "Boss." "What? What? We found another vehicle." "What vehicle?" The scout looked genuinely alarmed. "Miss Callahan." Damien turned so quickly that even his closest advisors hesitated. "What about her?" "She came here." Every lieutenant stared. Silence. Absolute silence. For perhaps the first time in his entire criminal career, Damien Cross completely lost his composure. "What did you say?" The scout pointed toward the cannery. "She's already inside." Damien didn't answer. He simply reached for his rifle and walked toward the entrance. The operation had instantly changed. It was no longer only about rescuing hostages. Now, the woman who had accidentally transformed his entire world had willingly walked into the hands of the most dangerous man on the East Coast. And for the first time, every lieutenant following behind him understood something they had only whispered about until now. Their boss was no longer fighting merely to win a war. He was fighting to bring Nora Callahan home. The abandoned riverside cannery echoed with the slow drip of water from rusted pipes. Broken machinery cast long shadows across the concrete floor. Salvatore Reyes stood beside the captured employees with complete confidence. His men occupied every catwalk, every entrance, every elevated position. He wasn't expecting a negotiation. He was expecting victory. Nora stood several feet away with her hands raised. She had come voluntarily. Not because she believed she could outsmart criminals, but because she couldn't bear the thought of innocent people suffering because of her. Salvatore studied her with open curiosity. "So this is the famous Nora Callahan." She managed a nervous smile. "I'm afraid I'm considerably less famous than your people seem to think." He laughed. "I've heard quite a lot about you." "I mostly organize meal schedules." "You also changed Damien Cross." She blinked. "I don't think anyone can change another person." Salvatore smiled coldly. "Then explain why the coldest man on the East Coast suddenly protects a hospital cook." Nora didn't answer because she wasn't sure she knew the answer herself. Outside the cannery, the Cross rescue team silently moved into position. Snipers settled onto nearby rooftops. Medical units waited behind armored vehicles. Every radio remained silent. Damien studied the cannery through a thermal scope. One bright silhouette stood apart from the others. Nora. She wasn't hiding. She was standing between Salvatore and the frightened employees. His jaw tightened. One lieutenant quietly asked, "Orders?" Damien never looked away. "Nobody fires until the hostages have cover." "And Miss Callahan?" Another long pause. "She comes home." There was no hesitation, no qualification. Every man present understood exactly what those 3 words meant. Inside, Salvatore slowly circled Nora. "You had the opportunity to escape." "I know. You came here willingly." "Yes." "Why?" She looked toward the frightened employees. "They have families." "So do you." She smiled sadly. "Not really. I live alone. I work at a hospital. My patients would miss me, but these people." She glanced toward the mechanic from the estate. "Their children are waiting for them tonight." For the first time, even several of Salvatore's own men exchanged uncertain looks. One quietly lowered his eyes. Nora wasn't bargaining for herself. She was bargaining for strangers. A sudden vibration interrupted the silence. One of Salvatore's guards rushed forward. "Boss, movement outside." Salvatore smiled. "Excellent." He looked directly at Nora. "I told you he'd come." Before she could answer, the cannery windows exploded inward. Flashbangs erupted simultaneously. Blinding white light filled the building. The thunderous concussion echoed through the space. "Move." Cross soldiers poured through 3 separate entrances. Automatic gunfire erupted. Concrete shattered, metal railings sparked. Hostages dropped to the floor. Nora instinctively covered the nearest kitchen assistant with her own body as bullets tore across the room above them. She squeezed her eyes shut. The battle became pure chaos. Damien advanced through the smoke with astonishing precision. Every movement remained controlled, every shot deliberate. One attacker emerged from behind a conveyor belt. 2 shots. Down. Another appeared on the upper catwalk. A sniper eliminated him before he could fire. Lieutenants pushed steadily forward. Within moments, Salvatore's defensive line began collapsing. Realizing defeat was approaching, Salvatore stepped backward toward an emergency exit. Then he saw Nora helping one of the hostages to safety. A cruel smile spread across his face. "If I can't keep my leverage," he raised his pistol, "I'll destroy yours." Time seemed to slow. Several soldiers shouted, "Boss!" Nora turned. She saw the weapon, but she couldn't move quickly enough. Without thinking, Damien abandoned the concrete pillar that had been protecting him. He crossed the open floor, wrapped both arms around Nora, and shielded her with his own body. The gunshot echoed. The impact spun him sideways. Nora gasped, "Damien!" Before Salvatore could fire again, 3 cross marksmen struck simultaneously. His weapon flew from his hand. He collapsed to the ground as tactical teams rushed forward and secured the area. The battle was over. For several terrifying seconds, Nora could only stare. Damien remained standing, barely. The bullet had struck his armored vest, knocking the breath from his lungs and bruising several ribs. She grabbed his shoulders. "You idiot." Every lieutenant froze. No one, absolutely no one, had ever called Damien Cross an idiot. Nora's eyes filled with tears. "You left cover. You could have died." He looked at her quietly. "Yes." "Why?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because I wasn't willing to lose you." Silence settled across the cannery. Veteran lieutenants looked at one another in disbelief. For years, they had followed a man who never revealed weakness. Now, he had declared it in front of everyone. Several weeks later, the Cross estate hosted the largest gathering of senior advisors in family history. The war with Salvatore Reyes had ended. His organization had collapsed. Legitimate businesses were expanding. Security had stabilized. The atmosphere felt lighter than anyone could remember. Nora quietly stood near the back of the room, convinced she would finally be thanked and sent home. She had even packed her suitcase. Damien stepped before the assembled lieutenants. His voice carried effortlessly through the hall. "For many years, I believed strength meant never making mistakes." He paused. "I was wrong. Every person listened. The greatest mistake I ever made," he turned toward Nora, "was kidnapping the wrong woman." Soft laughter spread through the room. Nora covered her face, half embarrassed and half amused. Damien continued, "The greatest decision I ever made was refusing to let her leave." The room became completely silent. Nora blinked rapidly, trying not to cry. Finally, she laughed through her tears. "So, does this mean I'm officially unemployed as your hostage?" Even the sternest lieutenants burst into laughter. For the first time in years, Damien smiled openly. "No, I was hoping you'd accept a promotion." She tilted her head. "To what?" He walked toward her. "My partner." The applause that followed shook the hall. Months later, the Cross Foundation announced its newest division, community programs. Nora Callahan accepted the position of director. Instead of managing only one hospital kitchen, she now oversaw nutrition initiatives, scholarships, employee family support, and charitable outreach funded entirely through the family's legitimate businesses. The mansion itself slowly changed. Children of employees played safely in the gardens. Family dinners became common. Birthdays were celebrated. Holiday meals filled the dining hall. The soldiers developed a running joke. "If the boss is in a bad mood, give him to Miss Callahan. She'll feed him." One afternoon, a nervous new recruit quietly asked an older lieutenant, "Is it true the boss kidnapped his own wife?" The veteran laughed so hard he nearly dropped his coffee. "No. He kidnapped the wrong woman and somehow found the right future." Across the courtyard, Nora stood laughing while Damien stubbornly attempted to help prepare lunch for the staff. Flour covered his expensive black shirt. Vegetables had somehow ended up on the floor. The kitchen staff struggled to hide their amusement. Nora gently took the wooden spoon from his hand. "For a Mafia boss, you're hopeless in the kitchen." He leaned closer with a smile that only she ever saw. "Good. It gives me an excuse to keep needing you." She laughed. "So that's your strategy." "It worked once." It did. Around them, employees smiled as they returned to work. The mansion that had once been known only for fear had become known for something far rarer: loyalty, kindness, hope. And every person who lived there understood the same simple truth. The most powerful change the Cross Empire had ever experienced did not come from a new weapon, a new alliance, or another victory in war. It began the day a frightened hospital cook accidentally hit a masked gunman with an oversized tote bag and taught the coldest mafia boss in the city that even the strongest leaders still needed someone to remind them to eat.